Welcome to my tiny estate. You guys have wanted this for such a long time. The hardest thing about this estate when we show it online is where are you in the set of buildings that we have, because it's laid out in such a quirky way. But we're gonna finally do a full tour of the entire estate. You'll get to see everything, and we're gonna try and contextualize it for you so you know where all of it's linked and put together. If you haven't already, press the subscribe button and follow our journey as we restore this mammoth project. We have also got the Dower House, which is over in the countryside beyond.
Borja and I together will be taking you around this property. Even though it's called My Tiny Estate, it's actually quite exhausting trying to explain it all on your own. This tour will give you a general overview of where things are in the estate. In the future, be on the lookout for more tours of all the buildings and areas here and the Dower House, inside and out.
This is the main estate. You can see all the chimneys behind there, all parts of the buildings. A lot of people ask us why we call it My Tiny Estate. We call it My Tiny Estate because this once formed part of a much larger estate in this town of Coleshill, and this is the remaining part that's left. The estate, what we got left, consists of everything that a larger estate usually does. So, you know, we've got stables, we've got caretakers, we've got servants' quarters, we've got the main house, but they're all in tiny version. So that's why we call it My Tiny Estate. We're right in the middle at the moment of the caretaker's courtyard. That's a perfect place to start because that's where you arrive if you come and stay here as guests. The first cottage here is the caretaker's cottage. It is the oldest cottage that we've got. It dates back to 17th century. Just the front section, the back section was added on in the 18th century. It was where the caretaker's family lived. That's why we call it the caretaker's cottage. We went into census records and found that it was a family of 4. The husband was the caretaker, the wife was the maid, the son was the groom, and at the time the young girl was still at school. The walls are around 12 to 14 feet high. They're big walls, and they surround this entire courtyard, which gives it a real nice feel. And these big walls would have sheltered the owners of the main house so that none of the servants could see them in their main garden. And vice versa, they didn't want to see the servants and see them doing the washing and doing the cooking and stuff like that. They were hidden away. And in fact, these walls are much lower than they used to be. The height would have actually been the same height as this one in the corner here. They've slowly decreased them in height as they've started to crumble down. We know that caretakers lived here between 1880 and 1920. That's why we call it that. But there's obviously a lot more time in its lifespan where we don't know how it was used. In this courtyard contains everything that this cottage needs. So it had an outdoor privy here. For some reason it had 2. So there's one on the other side as well. This little chimney here was for the copper. So the copper would be a fire where you heat your water to wash your laundry. So basically an old school laundry room. This is one of the cutest buildings on the estate. We love it, and it has a great view from the caretaker's kitchen. So it's like a lovely sort of picture moment. We haven't converted it into anything other than what it is. Still a laundry, still a toilet. The toilet disappeared at some point there, so we've just kept it as a storeroom. And then down the end here would have been the storage for the coal, very close to the entrance to the courtyard, and that's where they would have stored everything to heat the houses. We have it as a bin store now. You've got to have that, unfortunately. We think in the 60s there's a little hole there, and they used to have their chickens in here, and the chickens would come out of that little hole. So the gates, interestingly, are so big. This one's the smaller one of the 2, because this is where they would have brought the horses in. They would have had to be high enough that the heads of the horses could go straight through with them, and then this is where the horses would have been stored. But with modern day, everything's changing. Inside here, we've got a vehicle charging point. So this section here is now our gym. But it was once the laundry. The laundries were never connected to the house. They're always outside spaces because you'd be doing your washing and you'd be hanging your stuff out. Now, we're coming from the caretaker's courtyard through to the servants' courtyard and the servants' cottage. This is a beautiful little gem. You sit in here and you think, how am I on High Street? It has a totally different vibe. It's where everyone will come and pass and go through. We have a load of access points. So we've got the servants' kitchens there. We've got the gym, which used to be the old laundry. We've got stairs up to the servants' living quarters. We've got a bar, we've got a store, and then we've got access to the boot room that takes you to the main house and the cellars. Behind you is where you've come from, which is the caretaker's courtyard, and then the other way will take you to the main gardens. It's very weird that we've got the servants' accommodation over here, but the working gardens all the way over the other side. And that's why we believe that there is a path that leads round the formal gardens that hides the servants when they're accessing the working gardens and they can't see into the actual main garden itself. Under here somewhere there used to be a well. We've seen it on some records, but it's just been filled in over time. The previous caretaker told us there would have been a cellar underneath here, and that cellar would have been just to store coal, because the cellar under the house would have been to store all the food and drink. It's such a shame that we couldn't open it back up, but they blocked it in when they installed all the waste pipes for the estate. We installed a water feature here. If you've watched Saving the Manor, you'll know it was from that. Now, the outbuildings, we've got a storeroom here. We love converting the outbuildings because they leave you option to do anything you want because there's not really a set purpose for them. This we created as like a laundry store because it's so convenient next to all the guest accommodation. And then this space here, this is the bar, so it's very multifunctional. This little hatch here would have been a coal chute or something like that. Inside there, we've put a little speaker so that we can play some music. Every little space. Now this is the main house. Let's just contextualize it. If we go back a little bit, we can see a lot of the buildings. Caretakers, servants, main house. On the other side of the main house is the stables. All the main gardens go this way for about 1.5 acres. So around the corner is the servants' living quarters. That's how you get up to it. Also at the low level, you can get into the main house, and that's where we've created a boot room toilet area before you get into the main spaces. So this is the stairs that lead you up to the servants' living quarters. But interestingly, all this side is the main house. Now you've got the boot room and toilet here. This door will take you into the servants' stairs. So this is the servants' stairs that goes all the way up into the attic. And then that is one of the rooms of the main house. If you go round the raised planters, this is what takes you into the servants' kitchens. This was in the worst state, but now it is a much more welcoming entrance to the servants' kitchens. When we bought the place, it was a little bit messy. It was actually a public library for 60 years, so this was all staff accommodation, and then that was the actual public library. And then upstairs, crazily, we had 2 bathrooms on the back, right next to one another. So it was a bit weird how it was laid out, and we had to kind of work out how it used to be. So from the servants' courtyard here, let's go where the servants went, and we'll go this way into the formal gardens and where the main house is. This is what we fell in love with when we bought this estate, is these walls. You go through and it's a whole other experience. And if we spin ourselves all the way around and look back, and this is the lovely surprise that even though it's the servants section, it's the most exciting space when you come through and you've got all these white hydrangeas blooming. It's very pretty.
All of these paths, these are actually paths that they were here when we bought the place, and looking down at records, we found that these are about 200-year-old paths. So whoever designed the gardens put this in place, and we made sure that we left it in here. Now, there's something very interesting about these paths, and is that there are 2 paths. One for the people, the lord and lady that will walk around this path, will stroll over the gardens, and then they will have the secondary path that will have had a hedge, which we have tried to reinstate, but half of it has died. This is the thing with gardens, which will be to hide the gardeners and the staff that will be walking to the staff quarters, the servants' quarters, and so on. So basically, the whole idea was that they were never seen. They were there, magic happened, everything looked beautiful, but you will not see them if you were just enjoying the garden. So I'm gonna take you around this path. Look at this incredible view. I'm just gonna go next to it and I'm gonna hug it. It's amazing, and it must be at least, I mean, actually, these are referenced in very, very old maps, so this must be at least 400 years old. I mean, it's incredible, isn't it? I believe that use relate to spiritual trees, isn't it? That's why they plant them in the cemeteries. But yeah, if anyone knows, tell us, what are you referred to? I think it's something to do with the spiritual tree, and that's why they plant them in cemeteries and so on. We spent 2 months just pulling ivy. We had ivy growing everywhere. We could not see any walls. The ivy actually at one point in a stormy day pulled down half of a wall. Next to us here, it used to be the vicarage. So it was the vicarage, and the family that lived here in the manor house and the vicarage were very connected. So you actually will notice that the gardens were at some point connected, not only by the walls, which they were like a lot shorter, so you could see into their gardens. Could you see it here? But there was a bricked door so you could go straight into their gardens, because actually from very old maps that we looked at, we saw that the whole design of this garden and the vicarage garden were from the same designer. So they make sure that all the paths carried on from one garden to the other. So we're gonna go down, and I'm gonna take you through to the woodland at the back. Something amazing about these gardens is the amount of wildlife that we have. We try to control the paths, but we want to make sure that whoever lives here, you know, if it's like hedgehogs, which we have, if it's foxes, they kind of like do their own thing. You can see that this like goes in 2 different ways. To my right, there is a little door that goes into the working gardens. And we believe that this is how the staff will have come through the back lane of the back fields, through this door, through this back path, and then going back into the servants' quarters. So the other direction we don't own. We tried our best to kind of like to buy it off, but the estate that we bought the place from wanted to retain it. It will have been the tennis lawn. So the tennis court will have been there. The Lord was a very good tennis player. He had the best tennis tournament in here, and they had like mates with cocktails serving. So I mean, you can imagine the glam of 1920s with like, you know, all playing tennis and drinking cocktails. So just behind me is the gardener's cottage. You can see all of these amazing garden walls, which that is one of the things that we actually absolutely fell in love, the brick garden walls. Nowadays, if you wanted to build a garden wall like this, it will just be hundreds of thousands. It's a lot of work. So it was just beautiful. Dividing different gardens, working gardens to the main gardens, it's just incredible. I'm gonna take you with me back to the main house.
So let's walk through onto the main lawn of the main house, and then you can see a bit of the back of the main house. You'll notice the difference from the front to back. It's only 2-storey at the back, and it's 3-storey at the front. And the reason why they did that, in Georgian times, it was all about appearance. They wanted to look like they were as wealthy as possible, but it didn't really matter when you got into the house. So the front had to be so imposing, 3-storey, 15 sash windows, a big Georgian portico, and that's what made it really special, and it looked like these people had money. This house would have been built in around the 18th century. The front section came first, and this was an extension after. Shockingly, it's not a very big house. The biggest part of it is all the servants' accommodations. There were no kitchens in there. It was only reception spaces and bedrooms, and there wouldn't have been bathrooms either, because the bathrooms are in the gardens. It's still work in progress. We still need to work on it, get it back to a good state. From here, from the main garden, you'll see that you cannot see any of the windows of the servants' cottages, and that's how these walls were perfectly designed. None of the servants could ever see the lord or lady or the family enjoying the outdoor space here. So as you'll see, there is a bit of an indentation around the lawn. This would have been a path that continues all the way around. Victorian gardens were very much designed like that. They wanted to exploit their land as much as possible, so they created a circular path that goes all the way around the lawns.
Forgive us about the grass. We actually have Robert Mower. He's our best working, staff, but he's having some holiday at the minute. He's having some sickness time because it's not working. So we are actually very lucky with this garden that we have got very large mature trees, and that is something that you cannot make, you know, like on a new garden. If you have been creating a new garden, big large trees is something that takes a very long time.
This is the perfect viewpoint where you can see the majority of the buildings on the estate, mainly just the chimneys. You've got the caretaker's cottage here, you've got the servant's cottage, obviously the main house, and then as you spin yourself round, you can see the stables. It's very rare to acquire a building or complex of buildings like this anymore. The estate that we bought this from, they still own buildings within Kozel. So within the town we are in, they owned around 50 to 60% of the different buildings and land around here. So it was quite a big estate. Now this was their home base in this town. So they were really reluctant to sell it, but it got to such a point that they couldn't maintain it anymore that they had to, they were forced to. It just kind of went downhill. No one was looking after it. And that's the inevitability of these buildings. When you're not maintaining them, they get to a point where there's so much money you need to invest in it to get it back to what it was, that it's just unaffordable. Also, that's a big point that we should mention, is that it's unaffordable for us to get people in to restore it all for us as well. So that's why we're doing 90% of it ourselves.
Let's take you down to the stables, and then we'll show you the cottage garden, the rose garden, the working gardens, and we're gonna go straight into the stables courtyard, which is just as you follow me to the right.
The stables are where the Lord and Lady would have arrived in their horse and carriage. They can also be accessed from an entrance on the street. The Lord and Lady would have been dropped off at the front entrance of the main house, and then the horse and carriage would make its way into this courtyard.
This was, I think, it's been it almost cracked us. It almost broke us because we did so much work in such short amount of time. But a very large estate that will have owned villages. If every door outside the front door was painted, let's say in yellow, that was shown that it belonged to the main estate of whoever, lord, whatever, right? So it identified everything that they own. Someone told us that, I was like, oh, we must have a color. So obviously we have created this color that probably people will have never used, but we love it. It's this kind of like blue-black. So depending on how you look in the light, it looks in a different color. And then to my right, we actually have there the outdoor luxury toilets, the twin toilets that I'm calling them.
This is the outdoor toilets here. It has its own little tiny courtyard. It's a very quirky path. So you walk yourself down here and then you have to walk back on yourself and round and through. And then this takes you into a little courtyard before you go to the toilet. So inside this little gem that you don't expect in the middle of the gardens is these set of beautiful outdoor toilets, and inside this courtyard we've added something a little bit special, which is an outdoor shower. This is a very important part of the history of these buildings, you know. No houses nowadays would have outdoor toilets. Everything's inside. So it's a lovely hit from the past. Although my niece was like, I'm not going to the toilet outside. So to these generations, hey. You'll see that we have a wall that's starting here, and this wall divides the formal gardens from the working gardens. So all behind here would be the piggery, would be where the chickens were, the gardener's cottage, the working garden, the orchard, that is all over that side. And this is just the little pretty path walking into the woodland that would go all the way around the garden.
This door, I actually had to rush to kind of like have it restored, because over time with buildings, you have to keep on top of it or they just like go down and then you have to start from scratch. We believe this is like, it was like a dog's kennel, but we're not very sure. Behind me, if we go down that way, I will take you to the recently cottage garden that I started creating about like 2 years ago. And then we have the gardener's cottage, the rose garden with over 100 David Austin roses, and then the working gardens and orchard. So let's go to the cottage garden, which is becoming one of my favorite places, because we actually did, it was one of those that we started, I came up with the idea. It was actually originally called the chicken paddock, because we were going to have the chickens in the old piggeries, and it was just nice flat and grassed. And I said to them, we don't have chickens anymore, let's have another garden, a garden that I can just grow from seeds and cuttings. I didn't want to spend any money on it. And I feel like we did that the summer when we finished filming Saving the Manor. Behind me, we have got the piggery. So it's the gardener's cottage, which also has got the piggery at the back. The pigs will have gone there. This is the cottage garden that is really coming into its own. And look at it. I mean, you can just imagine it, Dean, can you? He's filming now, and look at this. This is just all coming from seeds, guys, from transplanting. Here is the courtyard of the toilet. This is the most incredible wall. I mean, you can actually feel the heat irradiating from the brick. So I bet at some point they were like having stuff growing in here. So the focal point at the end of the garden is extremely heavy. I cannot even tell you. We moved it in between the two of us, and it's very, very, very heavy. So much so that we decided to make it as a garden feature to never have to move it again.
This huge roller that we now have as a feature in our garden used to be the roller that would flatten out the lawn at the back for playing tennis. It's one of those things that we wanted to keep on the estate somewhere, even if we're never going to use it.
Let's carry on walking towards the working gardens and the back field. So we are kind of completely opposite to where the main house is. So behind the cameraman is the main house, and we kind of carry on walking deep into the gardens. Behind this fence is our mini reclamation yard. This is like privately owned reclamation yard. We're not up for the public to sell. Basically, we inherited when we bought these a lot of like tiles, a lot of like bricks, a lot of old materials that they look like scrap, and then we had to put them in a place to know what we had, and so it's all there. So every time that we're missing something, we're like, oh, let's go and see if we have it already. If we carry on here, we have got the most beautiful rose garden, and if I could only pass the smell through the video, you will have smelled it before you even saw it. We have got here 4 varieties of roses. Again, I think you will have noticed by now that we use the same variety, but we kind of like multiply it, and we plant quite a lot of it. We have got this very large holly hedge that it divides the working gardens and the orchard with the rose garden. I feel that back in the day, it was cut to here. This was the height of the, because you can see the division of where it was cut and has grown up. Behind me is the very sweet cottage, gardener's cottage, sorry, and this looks like it comes out from a storybook, doesn't it? It's literally, you cannot think about more British cottage than this. You are literally surrounded by gardens. You've got the rose garden in front of me, the cottage garden to my right, the working gardens and orchard to my left, and behind the cottage is the 4 more gardens of the main house. So it's literally located, I think, in the perfect spot. I mean, it really needs work. Look at the roof. You can see the daylight, like literally. So if you follow me, I'm gonna take you to the working garden and the orchard. This is the most exciting. When we actually bought this place, you could not walk through here. Literally, these were like, the brambles were up to here, reseeded with grass, everything. And we laid all of this section up here. We have got our beautifully designed by architect Dean Poulton raised beds. We bought 200 old oak railway sleepers. Let me tell you, these are the heaviest sleepers that you can find. We actually, just to pull one, it was extremely excruciating pain. Now that it's in place, it was so worth it. What we learned was that when we originally did like a big square, is that we had to climb in. So we designed this kind of like U-shape raised planter, so you could just basically just go inside and then reach every section without having to jump in. So the idea with this working garden was always to have a section of growth of vegetables and things that we could come and use in the kitchen, and flowers. Behind me, we have got an access to the back, but you know, we leaving this for wildlife, and it is actually really pretty. You see a lot of like birds, and they just kind of go and grab the seed. We probably have got some foxes as well, I think, because I have noticed, and who knows what else we have, but we just leave it for them to enjoy. When we came here, we just love the location of the estate. It's located in the town, in the highest point of the town, but then all the back is fields. You're in the countryside. So for us was always the idea that, you know, when we are old people and we cannot drive, we can just still walk and then go to get shopping and not needing to drive. You were still like within people, but still within yourself. Does that make sense? So that was like the big appeal, and having these big gardens. If we keep going across the beautiful raised beds, and I'm gonna praise them because it was so much work to kind of get them to where they are. We have got the orchard. Now, the orchard, we were lucky to have an original orchard with very old trees. A lot of them have died ever since. We have tried to kind of like get them going. We did what Montidon says to do, which was like to cut them, to reinvigorate them, but some didn't make it. We decided to, again, do the same that we're doing in the Dower House, which is leaving the sides wild and then with a path in the middle. The path in the middle here is much narrower than the one that we have in the Dower House, but yeah, I love it. It's very nice. I don't know, I just feel like I'm in a different world when I'm walking around here. And the shade of fruit trees in the summer months, you come here and it's just so cooling and relaxing. We are walking back towards the rose garden. So you can see like we have tried to connect the gardens in a way that your eye is borrowing the view from the next garden. So it always looks bigger than it is, but you still feel secluded within the garden that we are creating. That's always the aim. We put an arch, and the original design that we had, and that's something at some point could still happen if we ever get the funds, is that this is the focal point that you see. So right here, where we're going to have a stone trough with a water feature, they will just come out of the stone wall, and then you will hear the water. And so we thought like that would be so nice. You're in the rose garden, you're hearing the water. As you're coming from this section, you're seeing there's a focal point, and then, you know, it's just like, we can still do it, but that's the plan. We always have a plan.
We also plan to show you guys so much more of this property. There are a lot of nitty-gritty details that we can't fit into just one video. We have detailed tours of each building in the main estate as well as the Dower House, so be on the lookout for that.